Well, boys and girls, a weather report for July 25th, 2022. And I'm going to send Rebecca a link. How about that? How y'all doing? Are you guys like speechless?
Trying to think of a clever pun here, but I'm going blank.
Oh.
I'm doing fine. I just had so many windows open I couldn't find the correct page.
Yeah, I'm not on the right page either.
Oh, we have lots of links in the description today. Lots of stuff going on.
We have so many. So many. It's horrible.
So many.
Y'all want to see a picture of the new puppy in the family?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, it'll take me a minute to pull it up, but
I got something better than that.
Hey guys, apparently Answers in Atheism is live now.
Awesome. Let me see here. What do I have for us today? I have
that's a nice cat.
Oh,
there he is.
You have to wait a week for him.
Snack. Him.
You're actually going to name him that?
Yeah, I'm naming him Snack. I've been trying to explain to Loki and Thor that it doesn't mean that they're supposed to snack on him. It's just a joke. It's his name. It means they're not. It
seems like you're inviting controversy when you.
Right. I'm trying to tell
an
them.
Animal snack.
Yeah, I'm trying to
get across the wrong message.
Hi, Rebecca.
How is everybody?
My hopeless case.
I'm just peachy.
Yeah, guys, Mike sent me an email either yesterday or this morning. I don't know when you sent it, but it was basically begging me to leave Young Earth creationism, and it's a cult, and it's really bad. And
yeah.
So we can talk about that more if you want to, Mike.
We can. Oh my goodness.
So there's the little guy.
I think you already have some takers at Speed for that kitty of yours.
Oh, somebody wants my kitty? You can't have my kitty. My kitty. Well,
there we go.
Would I trade a kitty for this kid? I don't know. It's a tough call. Tough call.
I think Liam and their new puppy are going to get along real well.
God, that dog is just awesome.
Well, as far as I'm aware, on the plus side, kitties don't make as much noise.
Here we go. That's a good face picture.
It's got the most amazing markings.
I know it. It's a Merle French bulldog.
He looks like a cookie.
I know. He does make me want cookies.
Yeah.
Especially baked chocolate chip cookies, where they all
cookies
kind of
and
melt
cream
into the dough.
Yep.
Yeah. There we go. I don't know why they think they can get along with four dogs in the house, but each to his own. Now, this is a sweet picture. There's Obi. I don't know really what he is.
He's looking at him like he's a cookie.
And then there's the little guy. They're just eyeing each other.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Oh, look at that belly. There's no better therapy than rubbing puppy bellies.
Yeah. Dogs just brighten up your day.
But anyway, how you doing, Rebecca? You like the puppy?
Yeah. Hey, it's cute.
I thought, no, Rebecca hates dogs, and here I am showing off dogs.
Oh, no. Well, no, I mean...
Isn't my grandson cute?
Yeah, very.
Now, here's the real question, Rebecca. Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Look at that
Yes.
cat.
That's
But I have to say, I'm partial to whichever animal is mine at the time, because I had a dog and I loved my dog so much. So at that time I would have said dogs, but now I have a cat and I love my cat so much. So I think it's more personal. It's not so much an animal type.
well, personally, I'm not privy to the debate because I have both.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Which one do you love more?
We'll see with those
Tough
dogs.
call.
I'm lucky because I can just go home and I don't have to take care of them. But that big black dog that was staring at Lois, they named their dogs after comic book characters. So the little new puppy is Lois Lane. But the big dog, he is just so sweet and gentle. He's just a big, lovable bear.
That's always nice, isn't it?
Yeah, and then their oldest one is an Australian Shepherd, and they call her Peggy Carter, and she just loves me because I'm her grandpa. You know, she used to come over to the house, and I would keep her during the day when she was just a puppy. So every time she sees me, she just has to jump on me and say hi and everything. So. And then the big fuzzy German Shepherd's just an idiot, so so we just put up with him.
Okay, let's see.
Peter
Jumps.
has 5 cats.
What? Okay,
That's too much for me.
What did he watch on T Jump's channel? Oh, so yeah, he's talking about modern day debate. I was going to play a little clip from this, and this started a little chain of comments between me and Sal that I'm also going to share with our audience.
Sal and Speed talking, unheard of.
Unheard of, yeah. Okay, let's hear what he has to say here to PhD Tony.
Fast. Regarding, notwithstanding PhD Tony had very good things, I don't think I have answers for them, and I respect that, and we have to admit that. But there are also stuff on our side that is problematic. There are chemical dates all the way down to the Cambrian that are not consistent, such as racemization. There are things like oxidation, the presence of peptide bonds, etc. And, I've looked at this and I began to say, maybe there is a possibility this is all wrong. Let's have a reset.
Okay. That's not true. That's patently false. All of what he just said. And but he put up a graph and he has some idea. And Rebecca, I realized how me and Sal had the falling out. It was around January 10th of 2021 when I started asking him to give me a spreadsheet. And instead of giving me a spreadsheet, he gave me a video, SpeedOfSound 4 and 5 of aspartic acid racemization plot. Okay, so he shows his plot again, and it was the same plot that he showed on Modern Day Debate here. That's the one he's talking about. But then he showed me a formula, and I looked at that formula, and I thought, okay, this doesn't make any sense. And he's getting a graph, and it doesn't make any sense to me that he's getting this graph out of what he showed, right? And I'm asking him exactly, what did you do? And I wanted to see the spreadsheet. So that's kind of where it started out. And then today, I reached out to him again because I've been working on this problem again. And I guess, should we read it? Do you want to read his part there, Scott? Or can you read it?
Let me blow it up to a size that I can.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay, I'll read. Let me read my part first.
Okay.
Okay. Apparently, this is harder than you say. Still want to see the spreadsheet. What is the y-axis? Are you really setting DL to a constant? And why can't I see the whole thing here? Hang on a second. It's not showing up right.
That's weird.
Yeah, I know. Well, you got to mess with. This is OBS problem, so hopefully I can get it here. Let me go to Chrome All. That might work. Chrome All. Well, that makes it kind of tiny, right? So I can't see it anyway.
Yep, I guess you'll just have to scroll.
Yeah, okay. Apparently this is harder than you say. I still want to see the spreadsheet. What is the y-axis? Are you really setting DL to a constant throughout? Why be difficult? Why not send me the spreadsheet? And go ahead and read his part if you would like.
Because you're pathologically incapable of understanding the point, and I don't want to waste time spoon feeding spoon feeding to help you understand, and then in the end you'll misunderstanding anyway. Real professional chemists like Dr. James Carter understand. I don't waste time on people like you. The only reason I'll waste time on you now is I promised to have a meeting because of your favor regarding Taylor. I guess that's
several weeks ago.
Please don't comment on my threads or I'll delete your comments. That said, are you free to meet? Let's get this over. I don't want to deal with you anymore after that, but I do want, I can't really see it.
Maybe I should read it. I do want to keep my word, no matter how unpleasant I think the exchange will be. And I'm thinking, gee, this sounds like a really friendly conversation. And I'm just a little concerned. Okay.
That's not even the worst of what he said.
No, it's not the worst. It gets worse. So that's a no on the spreadsheet. I will accept that you have lost it and can't remember what you did. And then I said, oh, okay, I am confused about what you are doing here. What I get is that you are just dividing 0.5628 whatever by t. You have a constant in the numerator, right? And oh my God, let's see.
I don't see what
I
it
know.
is showing.
I'm trying to find. Okay, there's goddamn stream. OBS is kind of screwing me up here, and I don't have time to fix it right now. And okay, what the hell is it? Hang on a second.
Well, you said something about being confused about what was done on the graph.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, Mike Brusnak, I'm confused. No kidding, Sherlock. How about you show up on my channel live and I give you a piece of my mind first, and maybe I'll respond to your questions. And then you respond to him.
And then I said,
wow.
Well, I don't think I want any kind of piece of that, but I will show up and you can explain to me this chemical problem. And
Mike Brusnak, well, rather than giving you a piece of my mind, how about we do a public service show? I want to do a show on the effect of alcohol and cognitive abilities. Did you know that alcohol destroys brain cells? The amount you've consumed must have had a devastating effect on your brain. Your comprehension skills are pathetic, as illustrated by your pathological inability to understand the things you claim to understand and criticize. Is that not nice of me to say? And yet you're willing to insult me publicly, comment on my mental health, etc.
Maybe you commented on his mental health.
You represent your stupid pathological misunderstandings as some sort of scientific critique of what I publish.
So, there's more.
There's more?
Wow.
Oh, dear.
This is rough.
So, when are we going to do a public service show together? You'll be a good counterexample of how not to live a
life
of bad choices or something like that.
Life. You just say life. Oh, not to live a life. Okay, so that was it. And it's like,
no, I just want to say I understand your feelings for Sal, Rebecca, and I don't want to put you on the spotlight here, but I do hope you understand, at least me personally, why I have reasons for not agreeing and trusting Sal, let's just say. And this is related to that.
Yeah.
So I hope you understand that at least.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I absolutely adore Sal. I trust him to a high degree. I have talked to him about the way that he interacts with Mike. I've told him plainly, I don't think it's very Christian. It's certainly not loving. And so, I can't control Sal's choices when it comes to, how he interacts with Mike.
Fair enough.
But, what I will say is there is a history of hurt both on both sides, right? So, I mean, I'm not making excuses for what Sal said, because what you just read is really horrible, and I'm disappointed to hear that he's continuing to interact in that way. But it really doesn't change my love or perspective on Sal. I don't find him to be untrustworthy just because he can be mean.
Yeah, I'm not saying you have to. I'm not, like I said, trying to change your mind here. I'm just saying from what we've just read, I hope you understand what the perspective we're coming from, at least in some regard. But
yeah, there was a time when I adored Sal and I trusted him too, and that was before January of 2021. And then it all started over me asking for the spreadsheet and asking him to show it to me, show me his data. And he pulled a John Maddox on me and absolutely refused to do it. Then he did a video which did no better. I mean, he showed an equation that didn't make any sense. And then he refuses to answer any questions about the equation. I just don't think that is. I just don't think that's the way that we should be exchanging information with each other, even if we're arch enemies. Even if we hate each other, we should still provide all the information that we can about where we're coming from. Right? We shouldn't just, like with Maddox. I had a falling out with him over the same thing. I asked him for a paper. Will you give me the paper? It's like no paper ever came. He would never give me his source, and it's like, Jesus Christ! I just excuse my language, Rebecca. I just asked for a paper. That's all I wanted. It would have taken 3 minutes to satisfy me by posting a link, right? And I know he had it. Why not give it to us? I mean, why? Are you guys hiding stuff? Is it because if you're not ready to make your case fully, I can understand that, then say that. Say, I have to do more research and I have to, put it together. But please don't do this bullshit where, because I admitted I'm a fucking alcoholic and an addict, he's not going to answer my questions. What in the hell is wrong with him? I mean, you understand why I'm a little pissed and then I'm supposed to go on his channel and talk to him, and he's going to do what? Yell at me? Call me a drug addict and an alcoholic and a burnout? I mean, what in the hell kind of a talk is that going to be? I mean, I don't know. So, but yet I'm concerned because he put up a spreadsheet and he said he saw a problem. Now, I give him, I'm being generous in saying I really think he did see something. I want to know what he saw. I do not understand what he saw. I want to know what he saw. Maybe he's right, but I'm never going to figure that out if I can't reproduce it. So,
right.
I mean, my God, guys, let's try to be better.
It's like, we don't mind. Hey, Dessel.
I mean, there are some, like even Maddox and I once in a while can have a decent talk. Hey, Dessel. What are you wrong about today?
Everything.
Everything and nothing at the same time.
That's right. Andrew gets it.
By the way, boys and girls, I linked the very first video of a 5-video set from PhD Tony that absolutely obliterates, destroys, toasts, kills young Earth creationism.
Barbecues, whatever verb you want to use.
Yeah. And he's somebody who actually has a PhD in this kind of subject, and he actually does research in it, and he shows graphs from his own research, and he does a really good job. And there are five more videos to follow, so this is part 1. I put that in there for my viewers, and it's up to you to go to his channel and find the other 4 parts. They're not that hard to find.
Well, I'm going to his channel right now just so I don't forget.
Y'all should.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Let's make sure people remember that there's a Joel Duff live stream tonight, or at least a stream, a premiere.
Wheat from the chat. Wheat from the chaff. Yeah, he's doing one going through Standing for Truth channel.
Yeah.
I was wondering, Sal in that debate, he conceded those problems to PhD Tony. I was just wondering, Rebecca, do you have any opinions on those things? Things like lake varves and ice cores and stuff like that?
Well, look, I've heard the creationist arguments against those. And then I've heard the, PhD Tony and others. And I don't know who I'm supposed to believe. So, I don't have enough expertise to be able to form an opinion about who's right there.
Okay. Yeah. Usually the way that I usually go about that, if I have trouble, is I try to learn like the methods that they use to come to their conclusions to see whether or not those methods make sense. And then like look into the specific examples that they're using to see how well it conforms to their method. And I went about doing that because I saw the creationist counter arguments too, like with respect to ice cores, how they talk about how differential snowfall and stuff like that can have an effect. And so they were trying to suggest that's unreliable because of things like that. And so the counter response on the pro end was that differential things like differential snowfall are a problem around coastal areas, and that's why they don't perform these analyses in those areas. They go further inland, where it's more constant to get an actual reliable result. And so the typical response, and this comes from Christians on the scientist end too, is that the creationist response is no good because just as it comes with respect to radiometric dating, they rely on making complaints about how if the method is applied wrongly, you get bad results. But they never comment on where the method has been applied appropriately, where you would get reliable results.
Well, yeah. It's funny how you mentioned that actually, and just before you say something, Rick, I do want to say that actually does remind me of you were talking about the ice cores relative to the coastlines. It kind of reminds me of using rock samples for radiometric dating that obviously haven't been exposed at the surface and weathered and potentially contaminated. You want to use deeper samples if possible, but that is, yeah. Anyway, go ahead, Rebecca.
Well, I was just going to say, just thinking about the process that you're describing, Drace, I mean, off the top of my head, it seems like there's an assumption there that where if they've gone inland where it's more consistent, that it's always been so. And so I just, like I said, I don't know. I'm not in a position to say, but if I'm just thinking about the methods, there's one thing that already pops in my mind as a red flag.
Yeah, sure. I don't, and I understand you're saying that this is not something that you've looked into, so I'm not going to try to press you on this or anything. I'm just trying to share where I come from on it and as far as I've read into this debate. And even with respect to the notion that it could go that even inland you could get unreliable results because it's not constant. The number of sheets that we're talking about here, ranging in the hundreds of thousands, and the fact that you can, first you would have to say that it was so inconsistent that you would get something so far beyond a young Earth timeline with this inconsistency, and so that's like a big task there. That's something that you would really have to argue for, that there would have to be that level of inconsistency. But my thing that I think is more important,
not just that you get the same inconsistent dates each time.
There's that, but the thing that also is really important to me is that you can take the results that you find there and you can line them up with the Lake Varv results and get an exact match. Right. And I don't understand how you'd be able to do that if you're getting wildly inconsistent results with these kinds of methodologies. Why would they be so consistent with one another if they're in fact individually highly unreliable? And those are just like, problems that I saw that made me think that, that this is likely good evidence for an older Earth. But like I said, I understand that this is, not something that you've really strongly looked into. So I'm not going to continue to press you on it. If you have any further thoughts, I'll let that be the final word on it.
I guess the thing that really gets me is that I watch a lot of geology, and I watch geology about specific areas of the world.
Yeah.
And every one of these geologists spends about an hour explaining how an area of the world was formed, right?
Yeah.
And they're talking about millions and millions of years all of the time.
Yeah, it's just so interesting how you can look at a given area and it always has a history behind it. And each area is unique in that history. It's just very fascinating.
And just like a really quick example is like there were basically volcanic eruptions out in the Pacific, and Washington and Oregon weren't always there. Okay, they were just the big North American continent. And then these volcanic eruptions that were on the ocean floor basically pushed into the continent and raised up and gave us Washington, right? And then you'll see there was a hot spot in Washington where there were volcanic eruptions that came up through the older eruption. So you saw a volcanic eruption, and then it moved along and erupted again and again and again until we had Yellowstone.
Right.
And if you were looking, if you do an estimate, that thing would have to go 1/3 of a mile every, 2/10 of a mile every year in order to account for a 6,000-year-old Earth. And we would notice if the hot spot under Yellowstone was moving 2/10 of a mile per year, we would notice. Old Faithful would not work for very long. It would just, things would blink out on the left. And I mean, and that's just one single example. And the thing is, I've looked at hundreds of these things. And I grew up in the iron mines where we went down into pits that were, 1,000 feet deep. And you could look at all the different rock formations. And I see no way for any of that to have happened in 6,000 years. And that alone, along with these 5 things that PhD Tony does on his channel, should be enough to make you seriously question young Earth creationism. And if you do,
not even the half of it.
If you question that, then obviously, I mean, you have a different view of the Bible than a lot of your friends do, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
With regard to the creation, or with regard to
heaven and hell, and
yeah,
a lot of things. Okay. So this is just one more thing where you may have made a mistake, where you may have it wrong. Okay. I think your other stuff is really good, and I think you do a lot of good for Christianity. But as long as you hang on to this young Earth creationist stuff, you're in a cult. And the cult has no basis for basically concluding what they conclude. And that's just from geology alone, let alone looking at, the whole evolution story. And I think you should re-examine.
Or astronomy.
And exactly what in the Bible, like, you would have to, I mean, what literal interpretation of the Bible would you have to lighten up on in order to let go of it? And that's what
okay, well, let me just say the idea of the Earth itself being old is not a problem at all for my view. Okay. Because in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. And, so that could have been going on for quite a long time before God decided to create and, bring life into the world. Okay. So the age of the earth, the age of the universe being old is not a problem at all. However, what is a problem is where humanity comes in, especially because we have the genealogy recorded in the Bible from Adam to Christ. Now, I could concede that within those genealogies, maybe someone is being referred to that's actually a grandfather rather than a father. And so maybe there's missing generations. That's possible. Okay. So I'm not going to rule that out. I don't think the genealogies are perfect, but I mean, in the way that, we would understand as direct from father to son, they may be, but there's, I'm just saying with the genealogy of Jesus Christ, there's no room for hundreds of thousands of years of human development. And I also have a problem with the fossils being millions of years old, because that means there was millions of years of death and corruption before Adam and Eve came on the scene. And I just don't see how that fits.
I agree with you, that the Gospels say that and that would be a problem. Would you be open to the view that that Ethan, your universalist guest, gave that the Gospel writers, they were basically sharing their perspective on Jesus and may not have gotten everything right about that? Would you be open to something like that? So where like you could salvage the idea of Jesus having lived and been the Messiah, but some of the later testimony about him that you see in the Gospels comes from a fallible perspective?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't rule out that view, but I would need good reasons for believing that. And so, guys, the bigger issue here, look, I'm not holding that tightly to young earth creationism, but I am holding tightly because I've been fully convinced that evolution is not a viable theory. And all this packaging kind of goes together. And so you're asking me to believe people that I think are absolutely deluded when it comes to evolution, and you want me to trust them in other areas. And so it's a simple choice for me. Like I said, I could, there's many areas in which I could be wrong, but
Well,
I have absolutely
Rebecca,
no good reason to embrace the view that not only comes with an old earth, but comes with this preposterous idea that we developed over millions of years by natural processes.
Andrew?
Are you saying, or just to clarify, are you saying that the people who propose such an idea, so biologists in general in that sense, are all deluded? I just want to clarify that.
That's what she said.
Okay, there could be a spectrum there. Some of them have been, just not thought about it that much. Okay. Some of them just believed what they were taught. They didn't actually question it. Some of them have looked at the evidence and are deluded. Some of them are flat out liars. And so, I mean, there's a spectrum.
How do you tell the difference there?
I don't know.
I don't think
I don't need to.
All of that.
Yeah, I don't think.
All I need to do is look at the facts, examine what we actually observe, and what we observe is that evolution moves in the wrong direction, guys. With the wrong direction. It works the opposite way. It deteriorates.
Could I interject, please? Could I interject?
Sure, go ahead.
Jason has a question.
Hey, Jason.
Great. Thank you. Hey, guys. Rebecca, I was just came in. Did I hear you correctly where you don't dispute that the Earth is old? It's just you dispute that humanity is old? Or am I wrong about that?
I said it doesn't matter to me. Like, I'm not holding I don't need the Earth to be young. So it's what I currently believe the Earth is young. But I don't need the globe itself to be young for my theological beliefs to be intact.
Okay, but I'm just trying to understand your worldview, though. Is your worldview that I understand you may have the perspective that the Earth doesn't need to be old in order to support your view, but is your view that the Earth is 6,000 years old, or is the view that the Earth is substantially older?
My best guess right now is that the Earth is between 6,000 and 10,000 years old, but I'm flexible on that view. Like, if I could be shown the evidence that was, like totally conclusive that the Earth was as it is presented 4.5 billion years old, then I would say, okay, fine. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. I don't have a problem with that.
And above and beyond the evolutionary theory perspective, which you just made your point, your view known, like, forget about that. I'm just talking about the geology, the geochemistry, all of the geoscience components. I mean, you've probably heard this before, but there are a number of disciplines that all independently verify that the Earth is considerably older than 6,000 to 12,000 years old. So you're saying, similar to the evolutionary perspective, that those scientists are either misguided, deluded, liars, whatever. They're just interpreting the evidence incorrectly.
No. Now, I'm not doing this. I'm not saying the same thing about evolution that I'm saying about young Earth. Okay.
Okay.
To me, these are two separate issues.
Okay.
One of them, I feel the science is squarely on my side completely, and that is the evolution. Okay.
Well, but you're not. But
I know you guys disagree with that.
But you're not an evolutionary. You're not a biologist, correct?
No, but I don't think you have to be to realize how preposterous this theory is. Now, I understand you guys disagree with me, but let's just leave it at that for now. Okay. The young Earth stuff, I fully admit that the evidence is mixed. There is evidence. I would say there is evidence that the Earth is old. There's also evidence that the Earth is young. So what do I do?
Well, let her finish. Keep going.
Sorry.
Well, what do I do in face of conflicting evidence? I withhold a firm conviction, right? But if all I'm looking at is the science, I don't know how old the Earth is. But if I consider my theological beliefs, then I'm more persuaded that the Earth is young.
Okay, last question, and then I'll let everybody else jump in. So if you were provided, like if we went down a list of the items that you think are evidence for a young Earth, because you're like, there's some evidences for young Earth, there's some evidence for an old Earth, because there's both of these, I'm kind of suspend judgment. That if we went down, now I'm not saying now, but if you were to go down those items and a scientist was to say, that's not credible and here's why, that's not credible and here's why, could you be persuaded to change your mind that the Earth is old? Do you think that's possible? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good.
But that person would have to respond not only to, they would have to not only present evidence, but they would also have to respond to the creationist responses to what they've presented.
That's what we do.
I would love to do that sometime, Rebecca. Have me on. I'd love to do that.
Okay, cool.
That's
okay.
Anyways, I don't want to bog the conversation.
All right, Jason. We will figure something out. Okay. Yeah. Because you are a geologist, right? You have a PhD in geology. It's more climate science, right?
Yeah, I have a master's in geology, and my PhD is in climatology. So but I'd love to talk about it whenever you want. I'd be happy to talk about this specific issue, which is evidence for and against an old Earth.
I'd be down for that as well. That sounds cool.
Anyways, yeah.
All right. Well, maybe we can set something up. Yeah. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
And so with the evolutionary thing, you were saying how it only runs downhill. So basically, you're convinced that there are no confirmed instances of mutations that build things up. It's just all stuff that gets thrown out, basically, right? Like the analogy that Standing for Truth gives all the time of basically like taking stuff out of the car, out of the trunk of the car and throwing it out, and that's how evolution works.
Well, that's the general principle, but I will say you might be able to give me a few small examples of the contrary. But like when you consider the overall trend, you're not going to be able to overcome the degeneration that's happening in order to build.
There is no degeneration. There's what you speak of, if you're referring to genetic entropy, there is no such thing. It's a made-up phenomenon.
I'd even be willing to go so far as to grant you that you could get scenarios where there would be degeneration, like there are some population geneticists who talk about the current state of humankind, where we're in a state where like we're insulated from natural selection. And so, you know, we're not, our population isn't forced to actually deal with nature so much because we're very good at insulating ourselves from those problems. And so some population geneticists have expressed concern about that, about like the long-term possibilities for the human population in terms of that. But that's a special case of humans in our insulated environment. Whereas but in other cases though, where you're actually dealing with natural selection, that's a different story. And so yeah, I guess what convinced you that when we're actually dealing with normal populations out there in the wild, that it's all a matter of going downhill? Like, what are the arguments that convinced you of that?
Well, I mean, there's quite a few, but let me respond to this comment here because Mike, I wanted you to highlight that comment. I was going to ask you to highlight it. So it was evolution only runs downhill. Have you ever heard about, wait, this COVID-19 thing and its variants? Yeah, let's talk about that. So all of the variants of COVID-19, guess what? There's still COVID-19. Guess what? There's still a coronavirus. So what's not happening is this organism becoming something else. Well, I don't know. It probably wouldn't qualify as an organism, but you don't see it becoming something else, right?
Or organisms don't become something else. That's not how evolution works.
Yeah, Rebecca, that's nonsense.
If they can't, then you've just proven my point. You've just made my point for me.
No, because you guys are actually talking about two different things. Like I think Andrew, you're talking about how clades work, and so if something.
And this is actually something I wanted to comment on earlier. You were talking about mutations building up structures, basically, and I would like to, or at least speak like what exactly do we mean by that? Because that's not typically how evolution works. It doesn't build completely new structures from scratch. That's not what mutations do, and I would agree that mutations tend to modify what already exists.
I'm sorry, but I also think that there's a more important point here, which is that, Rebecca, the argument that you just gave, it makes the assumption that evolutionary biology predicts that on a time scale where we can observe it, we would expect to see one organism or one population of organisms transitioning to something substantially different, like making a huge leap in terms of their physiology or their genome. But that's not how it works. No evolutionary biologist even suggests that that's how it works. Those large-scale changes are supposed to take place on a much longer time scale. And so if we're going to appropriately assess whether or not evolution makes the right predictions about that level of change, we would have to go to that longer time scale to see whether or not we see them. And that's why a lot of people start bringing up the fossil record at that point, because that's when we're really going into long-term development to see what kinds of major changes could or could not take place. So when you're talking there about like, well, we never see it, but evolutionary biologists don't predict that we would see it.
Right, precisely.
Right, but usually we don't consider something a scientific like thing if we have not observed it, right? If you can't repeat it.
Well, let me harp on this. What do you mean by observation here?
Well, if you cannot do it, look, Linsky or whatever has been doing the E. coli thing for how many generations of bacteria? And
I'm not really talking about Linsky, though. Like, I was just wondering what you mean by observation specifically.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, you see this?
Jay Bundy mentioned Jay Bundy's thing, man.
Rebecca, do you see this guy here?
Yeah.
Okay, do you see Jay Bundy? He wrote papers. Okay, he's in the video with Morgan Freeman on Linsky's experiment, where Morgan Freeman brings it up. And this guy he's the real deal. And he says, okay, no, we did see, basically we saw positive beneficial mutations in these Linsky experiments, right? And they've seen them all over the place.
Her point is that it's still bacteria. That was
Right.
the original point.
Right. And that's the point that we have to iron out here. But first, answers in atheism. General question: are there any new nucleotides created during reproduction and cell division? That's kind of a terrible way to say it, but there are copy duplications, and there are like slip copy, like the two strands will slip a little bit, and they'll fill in new nucleotides. So anyway, chromosomes do grow, and they also get smaller, and sometimes whole chromosomes get copied and end up in a species. So there are tons of new nucleotides being created. One could say that, but it's just kind of a bad way to say it.
I guess you could also say a point mutation is a new nucleotide, and that nucleotide there that wasn't there before, but I digress.
Right. Yeah.
So, so about this thing about observation, so like me and you, Rebecca, we've had a conversation where I was bringing up the point about how detectives and forensic scientists aren't there at the scene of a crime, so they didn't actually observe it. And nevertheless, through scientific procedures like DNA analysis, and just basically all sorts of other things, fingerprints and so on, they're able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in the courtroom using that as evidence that a particular suspect is guilty of a crime. So like, if it's the case that observation needs to be something like that's only in the present that we actually witness for ourselves, so that would mean that when we actually take the evidence that's left behind and examine it, we're not doing science, and that like the courtroom procedure therefore must be fundamentally illegitimate. But you felt that it wasn't illegitimate, that even though there are problems, nevertheless, that basic approach, you granted that there's legitimacy to that. So how do you see the difference there?
Well, let me, if there was no difference between that process of, forensic DNA analysis and all that, and what we're doing when we look at, history as far as our origins are concerned, if there was no difference, then okay, you guys might be on a stronger, level than I think you are. But I think that they're not comparable. But also I will add this in too, that, that process of forensic analysis, it isn't perfect, right? Because even if you have someone's DNA, right, if for some reason it could be shown to have arrived at the crime scene in a way that was, not expected, right? That could be one way that it wasn't actually, a good evidence that the person committed the crime.
Yeah, so, I totally. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that there might be another, like the defense attorney might stand up and say, well, actually, I can prove that this person that's being accused right now was actually there at a later time, and somebody saw him cut his thumb on a knife when he was washing the dishes or something. That's how it got there, something like that. And so the prosecution has to rely on a plethora of evidence, not just the DNA, but all sorts of other things in order to prove his case. The DNA, nevertheless, still should count as evidence for something. And so when we take a look, and so I think it is comparable in the sense that when paleontologists take a look at the fossil record, they're looking at something in the past. And so that's how they're proceeding there. And so if you can agree that you can take a look at evidence from the past and try to draw inferences from that, like we do in forensic science and stuff like that, and that's a legitimate scientific procedure, then I think that you should grant the same thing to evolutionary biology, but then just make the argument that, yes, this is legitimate evidence that we're considering, but there's an alternative explanation that explains it better or equally well. What do you think about that?
Right. Well, and that's why I am saying, there may not be any question about the DNA, but when I totally agree with what you're saying. But the problem is, I want to go back to what Andrew said, because he made a point and I wanted to respond to it. And he said that he agrees that in general, we don't see mutations building new structures, but rather just altering existing structures in organisms. So thank you for admitting that, Andrew. And now I'd like to know by what mechanism did these structures get built?
The same exact mechanism, because if you look at a wing in chicken, for example, it's simply a modified version of a theropod forelimb. There's no fundamental difference between the two. It's just a modification of what previously existed.
Okay, but where did a limb come from?
Okay, a limb bud, Rebecca, is a very, very like just a swelling on the embryo, right? Okay, it starts out as a swelling, and that swelling starts to organize the center so that it will create perhaps a bone in the center of that, right? And we've seen all these steps, and we can modify genes very slightly, and we can change the structure of that existing bone, or we can create brand new limb buds on insects that weren't there before.
Well,
Right.
I'll also note there are types of vertebrates that don't have limbs.
Yeah.
So
Okay, but I'm asking, where did these structures originate? Because you might say, okay, we see how it develops in the organism, like from, embryonic development or whatever. But where did the information come from to get muscles, bones, nerves, skin, or scales or whatever to work together in harmony? Where did that?
Well, now you're talking about the individual genes, and those can simply be, again, modified versions of duplicated genes from before.
Yeah, so it's building on structures that previously existed for different functions.
Let me give you an example, like the Hox genes that organize our body plans, for example, that organize the segmental distribution of where our along which segment do our limbs appear, and along which segment of our body do our heads appear, basically. What you can look in the genomes of humans and other tetrapods, compare them to, say, a fish, compare them to, say, a fly, what you find is the individual Hox genes and where they're located have been duplicated several times. In fact, the duplications that we see in vertebrates, for example, might correspond to, say, the higher general complexity of the body plan that we see. So we know how these genes originate. They come from pre-existing genes, like I was saying before.
Where do those pre-existing genes come from?
Through there's a couple of things here. Because these genes come from pre-existing genes, which come from pre-existing genes, and you trace that back to abiogenesis. And so we could let this go to abiogenesis if you really want to talk about the start of everything. But when
we
you
don't
look
have
at,
to do that, because we can say that the first cell did not.
Yes. So I understand, and I agree, we don't have to go there just yet. If you want to go there later, we can. But what I wanted to stress here is that you are looking at what Andrew said as if it was some kind of concession. But I don't think it is a concession at all, because, again, no evolutionary biologist is saying that these things poof into existence from nowhere. Right. When you look at any evolutionary biology text, they're going to stress that the new features emerge from features that are already there and go under modification. And that modification gives you something new that's suitable for a new purpose that's being selected for in that environment. So to give you an example of new information and a new function, you take a look at like Antarctic codfish with their antifreeze glycoproteins. Those antifreeze glycoproteins come from pre-existing genes in the genome that code for previous proteins that do something totally freaking different. But over the course of time, when the Antarctic went under, gradually cooled over the course of millions of years, you see this development in terms of there's a gene duplication. So a gene gets duplicated. Now you have an extra gene. Does that count as new information? On your account, I don't think that would count as new information. It's still it's still capable of only doing the same thing. But now that duplicated gene gets modified, and it's capable of helping the fish not freeze in these environments. That's, at that point, I think that qualifies as what you're talking about as new information. The duplicated gene undergoing modification that yields a new function.
Okay, so what I'm trying to find out is if mutation is incapable, okay, of, coordinating in such a way to make a new system within an organism, then where did that originate? Okay, I'm hearing you say what could have happened once there was this and this and this, but like, come on, guys, are you not seeing the major problem here? Like, imagine, okay, I'm giving you the first cell, I'm giving you the first life form.
Okay.
Do you not see the diversity of life? And
Sure.
do you not think that anything more than just simple duplicate, like just duplication, is going to produce the variety of life that we see?
Well, it's not just duplicating the
Sorry,
genes,
yeah.
you're also changing them after you duplicate them.
Yeah, so modifications on those duplications, other mutational phenomena that you'll see, these things, the way that mutations work, they produce novel genes, whether or not they're doing something new. Let's just say that they're not doing something new yet. They're doing the same thing as the gene that already exists. But once that undergoes modification and yields a new function that is useful in that environment, that gets selected for. And that's how that population changes to incorporate that over time. And so that's your new information.
If I may, Dessel, or go ahead, Rebecca, and then I'd like to ask you a specific question. But
well, I would like to know, how many modifications do you think it would take to produce one feature? Like, how many modifications? Because I feel like you guys are like, I'm not even, you guys probably have a lot more scientific information than I do, which surprises me that you are grossly underestimating the number of modifications and things. Either that, or you just got a vivid imagination.
Okay.
Like, I really don't see
Rebecca,
where.
Not at all, because we're talking about 4 billion years worth of development.
Okay, Rebecca, do you really think we're that damn naive that we haven't thought
Mike, about this? Seriously, this is the point. Look, this discussion has happened over and over, and I never get a satisfying answer from you guys about this.
I don't see any satisfying response to what I'm saying, because you're stomping your foot and you're saying that there's all this diversity that needs to get accounted for. So like, we're starting from that first cell that you're going to grant us, and there's all this diversity. Do you think that this could possibly happen over 4 billion years worth of evolutionary development? Yeah, especially since there are all sorts of different environments that have different kinds of selective pressures. And so they're going to be pushing these populations in countless different directions. And so I don't see that as some kind of naive thing. Instead, I think that this objection that you're giving, I've heard it a billion times, but when you actually understand, you try to learn how mutation works, how selection works, and the amount of time that you have to work with, you should expect to see a huge diversity emerge over that length of time.
Rebecca, okay. There are thousands of scientists that have worked on these details for years, right? And they've written thousands and thousands of papers on these details. Okay, and what you're asking is for me to somehow tell you in the course of this stream what some of those details are. Like, for instance, how did the liver develop? Okay, it just turns out the liver is right next to the small intestine, that little crook in the small intestine, right? And we actually have extant organisms that have relatively degraded organs like the liver and like the kidneys, right? And we can see those in extant organisms, but of course those are evolved, but we have to project backwards, okay? And you look at how one of those little organs develops. And it first starts out as just a little tiny scab on the wall of the intestine is how the liver starts. We can see that in embryogenesis today. We know that's how it starts to develop, okay? And we can trace the genes that cause that little cell to basically pop out, that little scab, okay? And blood vessels have a little mechanism where they almost follow all tissues that tend to degenerate, and they infiltrate these organisms, right? And so do nerve cells. Okay, so we know that part. So we have these little organs that pop up that start very, very simply. And we can actually trace some of that in embryology. And we look at it very, very carefully. And we're looking at every single step. And then you look at the genetic difference between one organism that does it one way and another organism that does it another way. And then you start to identify which proteins and which genes cause that little bump to pop out. And then what happens to that little bump next as it basically forms a bud and then branches off into an organ. And all of this makes perfect sense. And there are tens of thousands of papers detailing that. And from that, we infer that this thing could have developed. We're not naive. We're looking at so many details that if you even just scanned a few of them, you would be completely impressed.
No, I wouldn't, Mike, because all you're doing right now
you
is
don't understand them?
storytelling. You're absolutely storytelling.
So let me ask you my question.
No, hang on a second. Okay, every hypothesis is a story. Your Bible's a story. I mean, come on.
Of course
it's written like a story, right? Okay, it's a hypothesis. And then you look for evidence for basically to verify whether or not that story could have happened. What they were telling you before, I think Dessel was telling you, or Jason, I can't remember which, about how we figure out who committed a crime. That starts out as a story. And then we find the little steps, the little tiny pieces. Oh, so-and-so was at such and such a place. We got him on camera. We know this. We have the timeline. We figure this out. All of that stuff is figured out. It isn't just a story. It's actually detailed in incredible detail.
Look, let me put it this way, Rebecca. The way you're saying it, you're claiming, okay, X feature evolving is logically impossible. Are you not?
Yeah.
Is that what you're claiming?
Logically impossible?
Or you're just saying it's impossible for this feature to have evolved, right?
I'm saying it's highly improbable to the point of being ridiculous to think that it could.
Okay, well, what if essentially you're saying this is unlikely to have occurred, or that this is unlikely to occur?
Exactly. I typically don't believe things that are unlikely to occur.
But you believe what's in the Bible, and you don't have any evidence to suggest that.
I have plenty of reasons to believe that miracles are likely to occur.
Wait. I just want to say one thing. That from a high level perspective, this gets down to which of these hypotheses, this theistic hypothesis or the scientific hypothesis, is more reasonable. And you want to say,
pit God against science.
Wait a second.
Evolutionary hypothesis.
Wait a second. But you're essentially saying that this aspect of evolutionary theory is so improbable that it's technically not possible. That's really what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're saying it's so improbable.
Exactly.
But okay.
Right.
But we know for a fact that improbable things do happen. Like people hit the lottery. We know that improbable things happen. Okay, so this
don't even give her that, Jason.
This ultimately devolves to that. If you say that this approach that scientists have developed over, like as Speed had said, over thousands of scientists over many years, is so improbable, but your alternative solution is actually more improbable. So, if you were able to present me with evidence that suggests that the theistic argument is more probable than the scientific argument, then I would absolutely consider that.
Wait a minute. Don't bring God into this.
Why not?
I'm not offering to present any scientific evidence for God, okay?
Well,
I'm not even bringing God into it. We're purely talking about science. So we're saying one hypothesis is that evolution happened. One is that it didn't. Maybe we don't know how it happened, or maybe God did it. And of course I do believe that God did it, but I'm just saying, is this, hypothesis a good and likely thing that we should believe? Now, what you did exposes the real issue here. And that is, people are so desperate to find a naturalistic explanation that they're willing to overlook the unlikeliness of it in order to keep it naturalistic.
No, I don't think so. I think that many scientists acknowledge and want to know the truth of how life occurred and began. And so many acknowledge certain improbable aspects, but that's not a problem for science. We absolutely acknowledge that some of the facets of this have a level of improbability. That's okay, given time and diversity or multiple trials. Those things that seem to be potentially impossible can become possible. If you say it takes 1 out of 1,000,000 tries to win the lottery, but you play the lottery 1,000,000 times, the likelihood is you're going to hit the lottery. So I just don't understand how you can't see that, as we were saying, with long periods of time and many trials, things that appear to be unlikely can actually occur.
Well,
I know.
let me just say.
Go ahead, guys. If I'm misstating anything,
let Andrew go for a minute. He got cut off.
Yeah, sorry, Andrew.
What you're so like Jason said, what you're claiming is it's not possible. Okay, what we're showing by whatever we're talking about, developmental biology, mutations, whatnot, is that it is possible. Now, again, that's different from, okay, is this how it actually happened? We don't know for sure. But that refutes the claim that you're making that it is impossible.
Well, but Andrew, I think you're changing it, because I said it was improbable to the point that somebody probably shouldn't believe
Right,
it.
but you admitted that it was about as improbable that was essentially impossible, did you not?
Yeah, but I feel like you're just kind of trying to lead me to that point. So I'll retract that statement.
Here, let me ask
say
you
it's
the other question
improbable
I want to ask you.
Okay.
Can I ask you the other question? Okay.
Sure.
So, and this goes back to the whole mutation information thing. So I'm gonna try to follow a line of reasoning here, and I hope you go along it with me. Okay. So, would you agree that with, say, a random animal, a cat, okay, that you have a genome with some DNA letters in it, and it's ordered in a particular way, and that happens to make the genes that make a cat? Okay, would you agree with all that?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, now would you say, just taking a different random animal, say a dog, okay, that it has a different genome with different letters, okay, would you agree with that? And it makes a different animal a dog.
Okay, yeah. What's
okay?
So far?
So you have one genome, one set of letters that makes a cat, a different genome with a different set of letters that makes a dog. Okay, now given the definition of mutation as a change in the nucleotides, change in the DNA letters, what is the genetic limit, the mechanism that is stopping, say, us changing from, say, if it, not just going by mutation here, if we were to change the DNA letters just by some intelligent process, if we were to do that, we would eventually change it into a dog or some other kind of animal just by changing the DNA letters.
Sure.
Okay, so what fundamentally, where is this new information you're talking about? What in that process is where this information component comes in? Because all you're doing is just changing the DNA letters, and you change one animal into another. Not saying that a cat evolved into a dog. That's obviously nonsense. But what fundamentally is where this information component comes in? Could you explain that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's say you put me, let's just say we had a room filled with refrigerator magnet letters, okay, and they were all randomized. What would be the likelihood of those assembling themselves into a book?
Well, we're not talking about a random set of letters assembling themselves into a book, though.
But aren't we? Because
we're talking about already a set of.
Yeah. Well, what we're really talking about
we're
is
already talking about
chemicals assembling themselves into a pattern that is informative.
Well, now you're talking about
that is able to.
abiogenesis. I thought we weren't talking about abiogenesis.
Well, I mean, but no, but within, okay, look, I'm giving you the first cell, but you've still got to get within that. Okay, so what are the chances of, if I start out with one book, right, and I just have all the letters of that book, and then it like is able to form itself spontaneously into another book?
Yeah.
Well,
so
it seems like you're. Go ahead.
Let me try this, because like let's say we have these letters that you're talking about, right? And let's say that they go through this these changes over time, and let's say that we have this book editor that only lets the changes that actually change it to a different book survive. And what we're talking, when I reference this editor, I'm talking about selection. So
right.
when you have these changes, the only ones that make it through, like let's say we have War and Peace on one end and we have Moby Dick on the other, and we want to change one to the other, and there's this generator that generates random changes in War and Peace, but the only ones that are allowed to change are the ones that make it more similar to Moby Dick. Eventually, over time, why won't it become Moby Dick if you have this editor and this random generation process?
Right.
Well, the problem is the intention of the editor, right? Because you're giving an editor who knows
right. And
what
so,
needs
but
to
here,
be done.
But here's the thing, though. When I'm talking about the editor, I made plain that what I'm talking about here is selection.
Right.
So the editor, true that an editor would have intelligence and he's implying his own mind to get this process through. But
Right.
selection, of course, is not sentient. It's still a deterministic process where the environment only allows,
basically.
Yeah, it only allows certain things to get through. It acts in the exact same way as that editor would, by only allowing the changes that actually change it into Moby Dick survive over time.
But the problem with that is, according to you guys' theory, these changes take millions of years to happen. So you've got changes that have no visible, benefit, that are still surviving.
Well, they do have immediate benefits in the local environment. That's the point. That's how natural selection operates.
Very often they do. Like there are situations where a mutation can happen and it has absolutely no effect whatsoever, and it's kept around simply because we have the energetic capacity to keep it around as eukaryotes. Right. We have a ton more capability to carry stuff on our backs, so to speak, than a bacteria does. So like for that reason, there can be mutations that just sit in the background for a while and do nothing. They might be like you talk about this thing called pleiotropy, where there are certain genes that that are carried along with one another, but there's only one gene that's actually being selected for, and the other ones get a free ride. They're not doing anything, but because they go in tandem with the actual useful mutation, they get to stick around. But the ones that hurt, the ones that don't get you anywhere close to Moby Dick and would actually draw you away from that, those get weeded out. And so like that's the basic setup there. And I don't really see this, when you're saying, but that editor is intelligent, but draw it over, like see the analogy there of how selection works and how it would work in exactly the same way. And my last point here is that you're saying, well, they need some, you're saying that it's all millions of years, and so these mutations, it's not like selection is forward thinking, but like Andrew said, just as Andrew said, it's not forward thinking. It either has an immediate benefit right there in the environment, and it's later crafted to different purposes over those millions of years, or it's related to one that has an immediate benefit, and that's how it gets carried along.
Let me put it this way, Rebecca. There's a difference fundamentally between what you're saying. There's a direction over millions of years leading to a certain structure ending up. There's a difference between that and what we're suggesting, which is that you have local environments and that they give immediate benefits over time. Those immediate benefits are going to stack up. So there's not a guiding hand along the millions of years. Evolution doesn't have a direction. But if there is a selectional pressure, okay, these immediate benefits are going to go in that sort of direction, so to speak. So unless there's something stopping those differences from accumulating in that direction, quote unquote, then they're going to accumulate.
So you think guys, I mean, look, what you're trying to tell me is that by selection, we somehow ended up with a nervous system, a skeletal system, a muscular system, a digestive system, and all these things working together in perfect harmony that came together randomly, that came together
they didn't
in
come
the
together,
genome
just
by this chemical process. Guys, I mean,
when we were, I mean,
don't
no,
you
because
see the
that's the
issue
exact
here?
opposite of what we're saying.
yeah, that is the opposite, because we were talking about selection there, which isn't random. The only random part of this was the mutations, and just talking colloquially about mutations being random. There's probabilities involved in mutation, all that, fine. But the only thing that involves any kind of randomness is the generation of these new mutations. The deterministic thing, who the editor is here, a non-sentient editor, is selection. That's deterministic. It's not random. And when you're talking about this thing about how they all have to act in sync with one another, that is what that's assuming, is that every single one of these things was all like, your heart and nervous system and the kidneys and lungs and everything like that were all necessary, all at the same time in every single environment that we're talking about right away.
Well, even assuming that, and say like a flatworm, for example, or a planaria, you don't have all those systems in place already. So they don't have like a closed circulatory system, or a heart for that matter.
Yep.
So you don't need all these systems in place all at once.
Guys, I feel like what we'll have to do, because I feel like the conversation as it is at an impasse, because I could get on board with, selection, the things that are, can reproduce, then they survive, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But the problem is this mutations producing the things in the first place. Now, I feel like we're at an impasse because you guys totally buy into this and I totally don't. And there's no amount of storytelling that's going to overcome my disbelief about this. I mean, it's just the story you're telling is absolutely preposterous. So what we need to do is get into the weeds. We have to go down to specific examples. I need to see what you're talking about. How could mutations, right? Show me how a mutation, it could eventually, produce some of the fantastic features that we see in organisms. And that is what is completely lacking in this entire theory.
Okay.
So I think we gave you, this will be my last thing, and then I'm going to shut up because I've been a little bit of a hog this stream. But I just wanted to say that for the record, Rebecca, it looks like some people who are part of our online community, they're interested in trying to change your mind about this. I just want to put it out there for the record. I'm totally cool with you being a Christian, and I have absolutely no interest in changing your mind. I get into this kind of stuff because I like to argue. It's just my hobby, I guess. And so, that's my motivation here.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I'm not going to be upset if you don't buy into any of this stuff. And my last thing here, I think we did give you several examples already. I offered you the antifreeze glycoprotein in Antarctic fish as an example.
But you're telling me a story, though.
No, I'm telling you something that actually we observed, over the course of time. We can see by comparing the DNA that you had a gene duplication that was modified, and that modified gene duplication gives you a new function.
Well, I'm assuming, Rebecca, that you accept, say, that nuclear fusion goes on in the center of the sun, correct?
Sure.
That's a story.
Never.
Yeah.
So why do you accept that? That's a story.
Okay.
That's a good question.
I mean, but we have good reasons to believe that it is.
Exactly.
And that's the problem with the other story you're telling.
So wait, I just want to say one thing, that I also am not interested in trying to convince you or change your mind. And I'm fine with you being a Christian and not accepting those things. But this might sound a little harsh, but I'm not interested in convincing you, because the only way that really will convince somebody is actually going to school and learning about these things. So I honestly believe that. Like, you can actually, well, you can go study on your own, but the reality is that the traditional way is a good way of doing it, which is going and getting a biology degree or taking some classes in this.
It's not even the tradition. It's not even the traditional way, though, because over the course of the vast majority of human history, the way that we've learned new things wasn't in a formal institution. That's actually a feature of our modern society.
Well, I'm saying that, like, even in the in days past, it was a mentor-mentee relationship. You had a teacher. Teachers were, I mean, the aspect of having somebody teach you something, granted, somebody can learn stuff on their own, but the mechanism. Well, I understand that, but like, you're not, and all due respect, Dessel, you know a lot about these topics, but you don't consider yourself a biologist, do you?
No, not by profession. Okay. But if you're asking me whether or not I understand this material, the answer to the question would be, in large swaths, yes.
Well, but that's and again, I'm being respectful. You could say that, but go take some AP tests to verify that's the case, or
sure.
go you could do that. You could say, I think I could test out of this stuff because I know a lot about it. I've studied it. My only point is,
Jason,
you got to learn this stuff. That's
Jason.
Yeah,
okay, so go take an AP. Have somebody go take an AP test 10 years after they graduated, and let me know how that turns out for you.
Well, maybe you lost some knowledge in that area.
I should take an AP test in biology, and
sure.
And
why not?
I mean, just as a first step, right? Toward my education as a biologist. What would I have to achieve? What would I have to? Would I actually have to have a degree in biology, Jason, to be able to speak about this?
No, but my point is that there are standardized ways of evaluating people's knowledge in particular areas. And so, like, it doesn't mean that you have to have done that to be proficient in a particular area, but this is an established mechanism that we use in our world today to validate whether somebody knows something and enough to be able to be a professional in it. So we're talking about all these issues, but guess what? Evolutionary biology is an extremely complicated topic that people go to for many years of schooling to learn these things. So to suggest that we're going to be able to convince you, of which you don't have any background in this area, I don't think is realistic. I think that you're setting your ways, and we're not going to be able to do that. So
I agree that we can't convince Rebecca, but I don't think that has anything to do with what she's capable of learning or not learning outside of school. Like, if it was the case, for example, that somebody who doesn't go to school can't learn these things without going to school, then all of these scientists who write these books, like, for example, the two that I have here in front of my face right now by evolutionary biologist Sean B. Carroll on evolutionary developmental biology, there would be absolutely no friggin' point for him to write any of these books, because the large audience that he's actually writing them for are people who aren't going to school on this topic. But nevertheless, he wrote these books because he felt that he could convey this information to the general public and that they would understand it.
Okay, well, I mean, but I still don't think that is a rebuttal to what I'm saying.
I think there's a difference between that, going out and learning some of the superficial details of it, actually going out to become an expert in it.
Yeah, this is going to get into a totally different topic, and I'm happy to get into it if you guys want to.
That's true.
My last point on this is going to be that I don't think that these two books that I have in front of me are merely superficial information, but even outside of that, there's nothing that prevents a person outside of school from going and getting the actual textbook that you would be learning in your classroom, or going to YouTube or various other places where the actual lecturer is recorded giving his lectures. There's also absolutely nothing at all that prevents that person from contacting that lecturer and asking, hey, did I understand this point correctly? And getting a confirmation or a disconfirmation. And that's many of those things that I just described are the ways that I learned about it outside of school. And when I did go to community college, I tell you that I learned very, very little in comparison to what I learned when I did this on my own. And so this idea that you can't do this by yourself and that only people who go to school have any true business understanding this or really talking about it, I think is nonsense for those people who are actually interested in learning about this topic but don't have a formal education.
I think you are very simple. You're simplifying this topic immensely. I think that the majority of people can't learn this on their own. Most people cannot do that, and they need a formal education. There's a certain number of people that can do it. It's a small number of people that have that capability, and this is why Nobel Prize winners or people who teach or are experts in these fields aren't just autodidacts that learned it on YouTube. That's not where discoveries are made, by autodidacts who didn't have anybody educating them on these topics.
So here's the thing, though, is that, I mean, like, there's a couple of things here. First, I totally grant you that the number of people that we're talking about is relatively small. I want to stomp my foot a little bit in saying that most people can't understand this. It's not like most people have some kind of mental handicap that would prevent them from understanding these things. But even so, there's just a small quantity of people who are actually passionate enough and interested about these things to try to pursue and learn it on their own. And so I have no problem saying that, yeah, the number of people that are actually going to be able to do that outside of school turns out to be small. And the reason why has nothing to do with their level of intellect or capability of understanding it, but rather simply their level of interest. And in terms of, like, you know, autodidacts contributing to science, did Darwin have a degree in any kind of natural science before he put this forward? Because actually,
that's one thing I want to say, actually, is because...
Okay, so let me just finish this last little bit. He went to school, he got a degree in theology, and he dropped out of medical school, and he pursued a lot of this stuff, like, for example, Lyell and geology. He read that on his own, and he used to go on these, like, long walks studying different kinds of creatures and stuff, and then at the age of 22 jumped on a ship. So, like, in terms of like, you know, whether or not evolutionary biology can be understood by somebody who doesn't have a formal education in it, the founder of evolutionary biology did just exactly that.
All right, just a complete anecdote, though. It's one person that did that. So he's one of those small numbers of people that were able to do that. I'm saying that in today's society, that it's not reasonable to think that, like, there's just a small number of people that can okay, then we agree on that topic. And I would also say
I agree that it's a small number, but the only reason why, again, it's a small number is because of differences in interest. I mean, like, granted, there are people who have mental handicaps out there that wouldn't be able to digest this material. But as far as somebody who has a perfectly fine functioning brain and their interest, and they have an interest and a passion in learning about this stuff, I see nothing at all to prevent them from actually understanding the material.
I just want to say that the reason Darwin was able to do that is not because he had Google on his side. It's because he got out there, did the field work, got his hands dirty, looked at these things in real life. And I think that's why the exception that proves the rule, basically, which is that it doesn't really matter so much that you have a degree in the subject or not. What matters is, do you actually have formal training in the subject you're talking about?
So, but see,
you actually have done research in the subject.
Okay.
Yeah, but see, when he went out and did that field work, this is going to be my last thing. I've been a hog, I'm sorry. But when he did that field work, that was his own prerogative. It wasn't him going to school and doing that field work. He had a passion in it. And yes, again, I have no problem granting to you guys that this is a rare phenomenon, because most people don't have an interest in it. Most people want to sit back and watch Breaking Bad and eat their cheeseburgers, and that's their day. And if that's what they're going to do, then fine, that's what they're going to do, and they should have no business trying to dispute this kind of thing.
I honestly, I think.
Hold on here. Okay, Dessel and Jason, I thought you were going to have this conversation on your channel at a different time.
All right, it's fine.
Okay.
Guys, I just want to say, Jason, like, it is a little bit offensive to me that you think that the only thing that's standing between me and believing in evolution is education. Okay.
Yes.
Because
I agree with that.
let me just, if you need people with an education, okay, Michael Behe, biochemist, PhD biochemist. Darwin evolves. He doesn't believe in evolution.
Who doesn't write any publications anymore? He only writes books.
Matt Lisola, bioengineer, PhD. Not and with a specialty in enzymes and
what were their areas of expertise?
He does not believe in evolution. Read his book.
Wait, Rebecca.
Douglas X,
What publications any of these people write? These are just books.
Rebecca,
write a book about
No, wait,
anything.
wait, hold up.
Godell's incompleteness theorem in any of those books?
Okay, look, guys, the reason I'm bringing them up, okay, I'm
Yeah.
not bringing them to you as, peer-reviewed scientific papers. What I'm bringing them to you as people who have the education, who have a very good education, and who don't believe in evolution.
What subject?
So it's not a matter of what the
It's
education.
not evolutionary biology. It's biochemistry. It's general organic chemistry.
But don't.
Okay, but
even so, like
PhD in biology.
Look,
PhD in biology. That's not enough. That's.
Wait a minute.
I mean, that's not enough. You have to be an evolutionary biologist. I mean,
This
doesn't make
works.
any sense.
This works both ways. There can be people who don't have a background who can learn this stuff and be competent in it. And there can be people that go and get PhDs that are full of shit and that don't know what they're talking about and that are blathering on topics. And guess what? The way that we evaluate that is through scientific consensus and evaluating their research amongst their peers. And guess what? Folks like Michael Behe, he doesn't write any papers anymore. You know why on these topics? Because they don't get published in decent journals. He writes books.
Touched the sacred cow. He touched the sacred cow, and now he can't get published. Right?
Just a conspiratorial.
I'm sorry. Wait 1 second here, though, because I got to stamp my foot on that one. Behe has published work in this field and directly supporting creationism.
How long ago?
It was like something like it's like a decade. It's got to be something like a decade by now.
I think it's 2006 is the last time he wrote. And Dr. Dan asked him specifically about this. And if he feels so strongly on some of these topics, why doesn't he publish this work in a peer-reviewed journal? And Behe didn't really have a response to it.
Not going to get through. Not going to get through because everybody is because there's so many people deeply indoctrinated. If you don't accept the theory,
Rebecca, do you think that an evolutionary biologist who publishes is always going to get published?
No.
Then why do you think it's just on creationists?
Right.
If you don't do good work either way, it's not going to get published.
Well,
There's
in this
no
case,
bias against creationism.
I'm not saying it's a bias against, well, I am saying it is a bias against those who do not accept evolutionary theory.
Well, there are people who do accept evolution who don't get published, so your point is moot.
Well, it's not because
Sachs got published a number of times, and he was basically promoting ID in his papers. Okay, he wasn't stating it clearly, but that's what he was promoting, and everybody understood it. They knew that Douglas Sachs was publishing papers on this subject, and he got published because he did good work. He wrote and he did research. And he actually, parsed the data, and he got published. So who's not getting published? The ones that Sal Cordova is getting published. Him and Baumgartner got published a couple of times.
Yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to act here like there's no bias amongst researchers. That's just if anybody's going to try to make that argument. I think that's ridiculous. Every human on Earth has biases.
Yeah,
but if the question is whether or not a person who's supporting intelligent design or creationism can get through peer review if their work is high quality enough for other people to comment, criticize, or whatever. We've already seen examples of that happening with Behe, with Axe, with Sal, and with plenty of other people, Sanford as well.
Okay, cool. Thanks for bringing up those examples, Drace. I feel like Drace is a little bit of a voice of reason sometimes because I feel like he kind of jumps in, and is willing.
Yeah, but he's always wrong.
Always wrong. Just remember that. Everything I say is absolutely wrong. Don't listen to a word I say.
Well, I mean, I agree with what Dessel is saying, too. I mean, but do you understand that kind of refutes your point that there's an inherent bias against creationism getting published?
Well, it's what's it say? What am I trying to say? Hold on. It is like an interesting counter to my point, and I'm very happy that Drace can cite examples of creationists that have been able to publish, right? But I think Drace also admitted my point that there is bias against.
Yes, and so I want to
because scientists
put that
are
out there
human.
because what I want to get out there is that I agree that in terms of there being evolutionary biologists who absolutely can't stand, boils their blood to see anything creationist or ID in writing. Yes, I think there's plenty of people like that. But I don't think that bias is so strong systemically that creationists can't get through peer review.
Yeah, for the most part.
There's definitely going to be obstacles because they will come across those people who have that strong bias to the point of absolute blindness. But is it possible for them to get through peer review if they want to get it through and they do high enough quality of work? Yeah, and I think that we have examples of that.
Most scientists, I've talked to a number of scientists that had never heard of young Earth creationism. They had no idea. One of them was Ben Gold. He had absolutely no idea. If you talk to people in Europe and England and all over, they don't even know who you guys are, let alone be biased against you.
I could tell you, like, of the colleagues I interface with in the geosciences and I work at a molecular biology institute, that those folks, when I bring up some of these topics, they are either like, I could care less about any of those subjects. They're just ridiculous, or that's just uninteresting. It's like if they can provide, if there's any research that can be provided in a credible journal, I'll read it. But until such a time, it's a waste of my time to even think about it. They don't give it like 1 second of thought because they're focused on action. I hate to say this, they're focused on actual
work.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's how I feel like most scientists, you guys want to say the scientific consensus believes in evolution, which is, probably true. But how many of them are actually using evolution in their work? And I'm guessing that
Most does
not, their belief about evolution has very little to do with their scientific work.
It has a great deal to do with medicine today and cancer research.
I'd also have a problem.
I just want to quickly note that, like, is there a difference or able to tell the difference between they are not getting published versus them not trying to put out their work in the first place for peer review? Like, how do you tell the difference?
And to stack one on top of that one, my difficulty would be that if there are researchers who have absolutely no idea about intelligent design and creationism and they just hand wave it away and don't consider it whatsoever, I have a bit of a problem there in terms of, like, I think that a person who does consider those alternatives, that their understanding of evolutionary biology will be qualitatively better because they've considered the best attempts to tear it down, and that's both inside the peer-reviewed literature and outside of it. When you consider it from every perspective that you possibly can and see the strongest cases that are possibly made from every different perspective, that is when you're in the position to come to the best conclusion that you can. And so if people are just going to not even recognize the existence of an alternative, I don't think that those people are actually as much of a position to be as convicted in their conclusion as they could be.
Hey, Jorge. Hey, Billy.
Hi, Jorge. Hi, Deepak.
Hello.
Yeah, I wanted to, I ain't got much time, but I wanted to chime in with a personal anecdote to this conversation, just anecdotal, right? But in my channel, I end up having to read way too many creationist geology papers from the PhDs, right? Baumgartner, Snelly, and all those guys, right? And it's my channel has a pretty easy job of debunking those because laymen and people in their spare time write scathing critiques of any major paper that's published, pointing out all the flaws. I'm working on one right now about supposed lack of folding in Grand Canyon and all this other stuff. I think it's a Snelling paper, actually.
Oh, good.
And yeah, I can throw it in the side chat if you want about the Tapeats Sandstone. Yeah, it's Snelling. And like a couple links down in Google is a much larger paper written on someone's spare time, not published, that points out all the scientific inaccuracies and flaws and everything he does. And again, completely anecdotal, but so many of my videos link someone doing that work because it's easy to respond to if you put in the effort. So I think a lot of the problem with the creationist publications is they are actually lacking in good science. Again, Kent Hovind's PhD, quote unquote PhD thesis is an excellent example of that, where half of it's just his opinion of what he wants to be true. I'm sure, there's creations out there probably doing good work, right? I see so few of them. My anecdotal response is, well, no shit, you guys aren't being published because you're not doing actual science.
Right.
Snelling over, I'm almost done. 1 second. Thank you. Snelling over here is saying, well, these obviously aren't bent because they're not metamorphized. No one's saying they're metamorphized. He makes it up so he can straw man it away. And that's not going to get anywhere in scientific literature. So that's my anecdotal point right there. Jason probably sees thousands.
Thanks for sharing, Orge.
To basically, to put it bluntly, just because you can try to get published doesn't mean you have the right to get published.
Yeah, and I don't want anybody to think that when I say that it's possible for a creationist to, or an intelligent design proponent to put forward work and get published in the peer-reviewed literature, that I would endorse that as good research. It might be good enough to get through peer review, but as far as my personal opinion is concerned, when I take a look at those articles and I actually examine them, what I have always found is exactly what Orge is describing: some kind of misrepresentation that made it through. And so that's been my experience. Now, and that's possible to get that through peer review. I know, Rebecca, you're going to have a very different opinion on that. You think that the quality is quite good, and that would just be an agree to disagree.
I have no idea what the quality is. I mean, I don't sit around and read their papers, and if I did, I wouldn't know if what I'm reading is quality or not.
Okay, so if that's the case, though, then don't you think that actually falls prey to Jason's criticism about education?
Well, no, because we're talking about two different things. Now we're talking about geologists, right? And so that is a totally different subject than evolution.
Well,
but isn't the point about doesn't the point about education stand with respect to geology?
And Rebecca, I think Kent Hovind would disagree with you. It's all evolution. Don't you know that? Come on.
Well, I don't think that you need to be an expert in evolution to see the problems with it. What's that?
Yeah, you do. Now, I want to ask you before we get on, we're going to shoot it in the head pretty soon, but I want to ask you, okay, you can't ask the question, how did all these systems develop, right? You can pick one, like the liver or the kidney. Okay, if you look at the kidney and how it evolved, okay, what would you accept as basically a reasonable inference about how kidneys evolved as organs? What kind of information would I have to give you?
I feel like this is just going to go in a circle, Mike. I've told you guys specifically, I would like to see a mechanism by which we could expect something like that to be produced.
Okay,
no
I understand
one has
that.
produced a mechanism for me. You've presented mutation, which has problems. So I not just problems, but like it works in the wrong direction. So
okay. What would the presentation of that mechanism look like to you? What do I have to tell you about? What do I have to teach you about?
Well, you've got to stop the storytelling, Mike. I mean,
What's
the way that you're describing it all, it is totally wasting your breath to say, we see in the embryo a little bud that is on the side of the, kidney or whatever. Look, all of that is just, to me, absolute storytelling. That tells me nothing about how it actually developed. And so you're just making stuff up. So that has to completely stop.
Okay, Rebecca, no. We do observe a little bud developing on the side.
I'm not arguing with that. That doesn't tell me what the origin of that is.
Okay, we see that bud developing, okay? And then we trace out all of the different proteins that have to be around those cells, in order to see that things start to change. Okay, we know about those things. So that's a bit of evidence right there. We also know that these come from pieces of DNA. Okay, and we can look across organisms and we can see where these pieces of DNA are slightly different across different organisms and produce different results. Okay, and we can go backwards because we are basically inferring to the past based on knowledge from today. And we can see basically how a rudimentary liver could develop and function and have some sort of benefit for that organism. Okay, and you might call that a story, but we can see all of that stuff happening today. So we are inferring from things that we know can happen and we know are probable. This bullshit about improbability, it doesn't work. That isn't how evolution happens. It doesn't happen by some rolling of the dice. That isn't how it happens. There's a very fine story for how the liver or how the kidney developed. And
It's the same thing with the forensics, basically. Okay, he stabbed him in this way and in this direction. Oh, but we didn't actually see that happen. We're just telling a story based on inference.
You shut down your mind as soon as I start to tell you what the mechanism is. Okay, when I talk about the bud developing, I am talking about the mechanism. Okay, and from there we can go to the genetic changes that very well could have happened. There's a very plausible evolutionary path from one thing to another, but you shut me down every time I try to tell you about it, and you say, "Oh, it's just a story." Well, everything is a story, Rebecca. Like your idea about what you did this morning, that is now just a story. What is your evidence?
We have a choice about which stories we believe, and I don't think your story is good. Why? And the other thing, I just want to make this one last point, and then I hope I can hear from Deepak. Look, I brought you guys scientists with PhDs who do not believe in evolution theory. So this is not a matter of education. Yet, what was your response? Well, they're not evolutionary biologists. I'm sorry, guys, if you want to farm out all your critical thinking to evolutionary biologists, go ahead. But I still believe I'm a person capable of critical thinking. I see the problems with this theory, and no amount of storytelling, Mike, is going to overcome that. What will overcome that is an actual mechanism, not a story about a mechanism, but an actual thing that we can test, observe, and see that it would actually make this whole grand story that you guys believe plausible. And I have not seen that yet.
Okay, how many books do you have by people that believe in evolution?
Well, I've got one right here, Biochemical Evolution by Dr. Athol Cornish-Bowden. Okay. And you know what's so funny is that most of the time when he's talking about evolution, he's talking about the problems with it, and specifically with his area of expertise, even though he fully believes it. And he's trying to persuade me that it's true in this book. But at the same time, there's great admissions when it comes to his own area of specialty. When it's not his area of specialty, he believes the stories. But when he talks about his own area of specialties, he says that all the mechanisms within the cell work in the wrong direction. There's correcting mechanisms within the cell.
To give a bit of support to Rebecca,
Dr. Masatoshi NaeI. He's one of the leading scientists in evolution theory for many years, right? Mutation-driven evolution. You know what this book is about? It's a history of all the failed ideas about how mutations could have caused this whole evolution process. Now, he still believes it. I don't know why, but he does. So, I've read books by evolution-believing scientists.
Thank you very much for bringing him up, because I had his work and I freaking lost it, and I was going crazy because I couldn't remember his name. So just thanks for bringing him up. So now I'm able to go and get his stuff.
I'm going to let Billy go after me, but I just wanted to say in Rebecca's defense, it is a huge ask to say, oh, well, it's already been done, so you should believe it because I say so, right? Rebecca's issue is to her real issue, and it's probably going to take a whole lot. And that's why we come in here all the time, right? It's take a whole lot to pass that threshold in her mind, and that's perfectly reasonable, right? Just because
Take
we all
hours
agree
and hours.
Rebecca's stance doesn't mean Rebecca necessarily is lesser than for having her stance. That's why we do these things.
Yep, it is. And it takes hours and hours and hours to talk about kidney evolution or liver
It takes
evolution.
weeks to talk about kidney evolution, not hours.
Yeah,
right?
you're
PhDs
Just,
have to do 8-10 years of education for a reason.
Yeah.
We should really hear from Deepak, but I just want to thank Rebecca for coming on here into the Lion's Den. Very brave of her to have this conversation with so many people against her conclusion. So
I agree.
Oh, I get a thrill out of it, Drace. Thank you.
What kind of thrill do you get? I'm worried about you. What the hell?
I don't know. I just
Oh my God.
I enjoy the controversy. I enjoy the attention. I'm like your favorite little creationist play toy, I think.
That's right. You are. You're the only one I have hope for.
Okay, Deepak, will you chime in?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's see. I think it's a very American. That's what struck me when I was listening earlier. It's like it's a very American attitude to go into a room full of experts. I guess this isn't a room full of experts, right?
Yeah.
But to say
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
like, all the experts are wrong, I'm right. How are you guys not seeing what I'm seeing, right? Like, I've been in that situation before, right? Where it's like all the experts are telling me something else, and my own reasoning, and it seems like pretty simple, clear reasoning leads me to a different answer. I don't think my attitude then has always been like, okay, guys, tell me what I'm missing. Like, obviously I'm missing something. Obviously I'm getting this wrong because you guys all can't be wrong about this.
why do you come to it? I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
But that's always been my attitude. And to this day, there are still things where I'm still confused about things. And I think, like, how is it possible that the answer is X? But it has to be because everyone who's an expert says it is. So I'm just missing something. So I don't know.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. It's just that, like, number one, you say it's an American attitude, and while I am from America, I consider myself very distinctly apart from most American culture. And when
So am I,
talk
by
to-
the way. I am American too. So
Yeah, and so, like, I just, like, when people go ahead and describe me as American, I automatically stomp my foot because I just consider myself such an outsider to the culture at large. But even so, when I've talked to many people from Europe, from Asia, the attitude seems to be pretty much as you're describing, where it tends to, but not always, be the case that people automatically just assume that if there's a majority opinion amongst experts, that it has to be right. And very often that will be the case. But there are also examples throughout history where that's not the case. And one of my favorite ones is actually from Peter Mitchell during the Oxphos Wars about oxidative phosphorylation and how energy is produced with respect to the mitochondria. And he had such a difficult time convincing his peers, and he was just this lone wolf for such a long time. But now his work is in the textbooks, and he actually ended up having to leave his post at the college that he was teaching. He was so stressed out by a lot of the dumpster fires that were going back and forth. He ended up developing ulcers and resigned from his teaching position. And yet, nevertheless, what he said is now standard curriculum. And he's not simply the only example. There are others as well where, and this is typically also how consensus changes, is that there's some kind of minority perspective where everybody thinks that they're freaking wrong. But it turns out that minority simply was clued into something that nobody else had seen yet. And so I totally grant you that there are many examples where where a person, whether expert or non-expert, will come in with this kind of arrogant attitude, and they don't understand something, and they should just shut up and listen. But there are other examples where that's not the case, and the opposite is true.
Yeah, but like, again, you're in that epistemological position where you recognize that there's a small chance that you might be the one who's right after all, but you also know that the odds are against you, right? And also, like, the person who tends to be correct, like, the minority view that ends up winning usually is by someone who is an expert himself, who understand
Correct.
all the reasons the others give, right? And it's put in the work, right? 10 years of organic chemistry.
Well, they
And-
keep trying
Right,
and trying
and
too.
Deepak,
They don't. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, Andrew.
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
Deepak, I agree with you. If it was me against every scientist, then, I would say, okay, you guys must know something I don't. But that's not the situation. There are many scientists who completely reject evolution theory. And I've read both sides. And I think they're right. And I don't think I have to be an expert to see the problems with evolution.
Well, first of all, many is an exaggeration. It's not many. And secondly, that again, respectfully, I can tell you from my own experiences, I have students come to me that will read a paper and think that they understood it, and they completely did not understand it at all. They misinterpreted it completely, and it has to do with their lack of knowledge in the particular area. So it's very easy for you to say, I've looked at this and I just don't agree with these positions. But in some ways, you could say, what you don't know what you don't know. And with regards to what Drace is saying, I would agree. But oftentimes these people come in and they're like, look, I have this hypothesis. I understand that it's going against the mass consensus. I could be wrong, but I'm proposing these things. What's wrong with what I'm saying? And oftentimes experts will go, they'll argue back and forth, but a lot of them will say, interesting hypothesis. It's something we should consider. And over time, that's how scientific consensus changes. Oftentimes it's not like it will go it takes a while, but it doesn't take a lot. Oftentimes it's not like it takes 200 years. If there's an idea that's proposed, that usually within 10, 20, 30 years, that idea, people will evaluate that idea and they'll be like, you know what? We've done a lot of work on this. And you know what? This person is right. So I haven't seen that with intelligent design. It's been around for quite a long time. It's not like there's a mass change in view.
If I ever ended up being in the position of starting to seriously doubt the evolutionary consensus, man, I don't know what vast swaths of other science I would start doubting as well. Quantum mechanics is even more ridiculous sounding than evolution. Forget evolution. Quantum mechanics is absurd. It's absolutely absurd.
Agreed.
Relativity
but it's a valid theory. I mean,
but it has the evidence. They've got the receipts.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, whatever.
At the same time, though, I don't think that there's anybody who's an expert in quantum mechanics that's going to tell you that it's absolutely right in every respect. They all recognize that there are problems with it with respect to general relativity, and that both of those theories are going to have to get revised over time. So, I
agree.
And just to kind of quickly add on to the point you're making, Jason, I think what's really trying to drive home at is that they didn't stick around. They didn't not publish things. They kept on putting the effort into it. They kept on providing evidence to back their idea. And if that ends up being the case, if they end up pushing through it and having enough data to support their idea, then eventually, it will be accepted. But that's just not the case with ID, like you said.
Even as an alternative theory, even as one to say, we don't know if intelligent design is actually correct, but it's a workable hypothesis that is taught as potential, just like with quantum mechanics. Now that's taught, and the people are like, look, there's a lot of unknowns, but it's actual theory that's taught. Intelligent design is not a theory that's taught. It's not even recognized as a legitimate theory. So until such a time as it can make that breakthrough, then I just don't think it's realistic to consider that as an alternative to evolution.
I pay a lot of attention to intelligent design when they start talking about theories of complexity and information. And they've written some interesting things about that, particularly a guy named Abel and his buddy D'Onofrio. I mean, they've written these incredibly dense pieces. And when you read them carefully, they make a lot of there's a lot of bullshit in there, but on the other hand, they really get into the technical details of complexity. And these guys are intelligent design people, and he's written like 150 papers. It's cool, and I'm very interested in that stuff because I'm always looking for them to make some kind of a breakthrough or some sense, because that would change my mind, right? And I'm very open to that. But thus far, they haven't succeeded in making a reasonable case. So,
yeah, I mean, whenever, like, this is one place, right, where I think sometimes we come on too strong when we say, oh, you cannot prove that something was designed, right? Like, there's this endless argument about, like, oh, look at the human body. It clearly has the hallmarks of design. Yeah, and then the atheist would, or whatever, the evolutionary side would argue, but, there's, you don't know what design is, and you can't define what design is, and so on. And I actually feel like, there's a possible world where one day, just like we formalize the notion of information, right, Shannon entropy and so on, we might actually have a formal definition for design that you could apply to something like the human genome and prove, and at least prove.
Yeah, it's mathematically possible. There are areas of mathematics that we could apply to that, and it would be very interesting.
Yeah.
And those things I pay a lot of attention to.
Yeah, but I haven't heard of one that's been reliable so far.
No, they haven't quite pulled it off. I don't know. You got to shoot her in the head, guys. We're going over 2 hours.
Well, again, thank you for talking, Rebecca. Got a bit heated back there, but I appreciate you talking nonetheless.
Hey, I just want to say thanks to Otangelo for elucidating me in the chat. Yeah, I really appreciate that, Dr. Grasso. I'm going to be reading some of your peer-reviewed papers sometime soon. So.
Oh yeah, we got to.
Yeah.
Dr. Grasso, Rebecca, even if we are on opposite sides.
Dr. Grasso didn't even know that prokaryotes have topoisomerase. So.
Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time with me, and I didn't feel like it got too heated. Nothing was offensive to me. I mean, except for the education thing, but that's okay. I still love Jason. So anyway, but anyway, you guys have been great. Thanks for having me on Speed.
Yep, I had my finger on the remove button a couple times, Rebecca, but
really?
Yeah, no. I'm sure he would. Yeah, he does that to me occasionally.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, yeah. Well, you would just join the ranks of Danny, so you could feel okay.
Yeah.
I would. Yeah, no doubt.
Weenie, the Danny Weenie. Okay, guys, we're going to put her in the head and go backstage in a minute. What are you doing? Oh, yeah. Goodbye, cruel world, I'd like to say.